But speaking of people who we know want to know what they have to say and are always genuine and reflected and dedicating to get it better every single day, let's bring in our friend, yours, ESPN 1530's Mo Egger. Welcome back, buddy.
It's good to be here. What's going on?
Oh, not too much. We were just we listened to some of Joe Burrow's press conference yesterday, which I know you played in, I guess, the 4:00 hour after I left you yesterday on Tuesday on ESPN 1530.
Did you listen to the questions?
I couldn't hear them very well. So are we going to bring that up again? Look, I'm working on it. I said I will just approach. I'm just going to approach. I'm just going to walk up. I'm going to speak into the player's microphone or the coach's microphone. I'm going to grab it, pull it towards me, ask the question, and hand it back and say that was for Mo, and then and all of his listeners, and then hand it back. That's what I'm going to do as my gift to you.
Thank you.
But we talked out Burrow. So I don't want to go further on that with you. What I want to do with you, Mo, is something a little different, as we can kind of flip forward the state of the roster with the vast majority of where they're going to be set. And I want to play a game of run, pass, or boot because I love run, pass, or boot.
Oh boy.
But what I want to do is we're going to run, pass, or boot essentially the top of the depth chart at each position group from 2022, from 2023. You can see I'm
trying to find something to write on.
Don't worry. I'm going to put it all in front of you. I have it all projected. So see, take a look at your screen there. If you take a look at your screen, wow. We've got you taken care of. So you don't even have to I'm going to have it all in front of you.
I just pulled out an Easter card from 2017. I'm going to write on the back of it.
Oh, wow. Good to know that it's right there for you. That's excellent. Let's start with the offensive line here. Okay. So who would you take if we laid these out in front of you today? One, you'd say, thank goodness it's no longer 2022.
Wow.
Which wasn't terrible. Right. But sure. Would this be a simple, what would you run, pass, or boot on these three? Which ones would you take? Orlando Brown, Cordell Volson, Ted Karras, Alex Kappa, Trent Brown, Amarius Mims, and Cody Ford are kind of your top 7 today. Last year, obviously, the difference being right tackle, Jonah Williams, backups, Jackson Carman, and Cody Ford. And then you had Jonah Williams at left tackle in 22, Lel Collins at right tackle in 22, Jackson Carman, Akeem Adeniji. Yeah. So, we're all booting 22, I think.
So this is going to be a bit of a cop-out. I'm going to run with 2023 because I don't think, look, the Bengals offensive line wasn't great, right? It's maybe at best league average. We could dive into offensive line metrics, but when I think of why things went wrong last season, I don't think of the offensive line. So if I could go back to last season and I could get a better performing defense and 17 healthy games of Joe Burrow, which I understand it hinges on the quality of the offensive line, but I would take a healthy Joe Burrow behind that offensive line with a better defense and take my chances. I don't view offensive line play last season as one of the major reasons why this team didn't live up to our expectations. That starts and ends with Joe Burrow's health, defense underperforming, big drop off from that unit. So I think last year, plus, and you and I have talked about this a bunch, they got 17 games of the same 5 guys starting. If you took that offensive line and put it on this year's team where it feels like, all right, we're going to do the whole thing. Is Joe Burrow going to stay healthy again? And Mike Gesicki and Higgins and Chase are back. And I think they've gotten a little bit more explosive in the backfield. And then there have been changes on defense. If you gave me last year's offensive line and put it on this year's team, I feel like that's an 11-12 win team that can win the division and win the whole thing. So I'm going to run with that. I'm going to run with that group. I'll pass on this coming season because my guess is they don't have 17 games where the same 5 guys start. Maybe that's because of injury. Maybe that's because Amarius Mims pushes the coaching staff to have him replace Trent Brown. Maybe Trent Brown is not a capable replacement for Jonah Williams. It's a group that a lot of those guys are a year older. Now, I love the high end of Amarius Mims. Like you've done this extensively. You can't find anybody who will say, God, what he put on tape was sloppy or bad or not up to snuff for a first rounder. It's not about what he's done. It's about what he hasn't done. He hasn't played nearly enough. Okay, well, But if he gets into the game, I'm going to assume that I should have some faith in the raw ability, the fact that he didn't have any penalties, holding or false starts at Georgia. He didn't give up a sack, didn't give up a quarterback hit. I'm going to figure that translates into some level of immediate success in the NFL. I've talked a lot about the difference between a project and a guy who just needs some seasoning. Amarius Mims doesn't seem like a project to me, but yeah, there's some unknowns there. And so I'm going to pass with that group. And then I look at 2022 and I see the names Jackson Carman and Akeem Adeniji. Yeah. We're booting that one.
We're booting that one. I don't think there's any question there. Don't want any part of that again.
Right.
And I'm with you. I think that, when you look at 23, you were thinking of the stability because of the lack of injury. Mm-hmm. But, if you were at a point where Jackson Carman was starting for you at left or right tackle last year, which realistically should have probably happened at some point just because of the nature of the NFL, you don't feel as good. And I think having somebody like Amarius Mims waiting in the wings, or potentially starting in Trent Brown waiting in the wings, is ideal. Cordell Volson, is better than the 2023 version. Now, are you getting a lesser Karras and Kappa as they get older? I don't know that yet. I don't think so. But I think Volson is definitely better than the guy who stepped in opening day a year ago. And that matters too. And so is having the continuity of those four next, Orlando Brown next to him for another year. So I'm taking 24. I there's a little bit more of an unknown to it, but I feel a whole lot better about the depth, and I feel a whole lot better about the continuity and about Volson than I did. So let's move.
And I feel like the Cordell Volson sort of ascension late last season was one of the hidden storylines of the year, where if we're talking about him in October, it's like, oh boy, they're going to have to find somebody to at least compete with him. And by the time the season ended, we looked at him and went, all right, left guard is settled. Left guard he's going to hold that down for a while. And that's a really good place to be.
Yeah. Let's shift the running back. In 22, you basically had Joe Mixon and nobody in Samaje Perine. And Perine evolved as the year went on. 23, of course, last year you had Mixon, Chase Brown, and third down running back was Drew Sample for some reason. And then in 24, this year you got Chase Brown and Zach Moss in some combination, with Moss likely in the third down role plus. And Travion Williams is still there. Which of these groups would you take if you put all these next to each other?
So can I ask, in 2023, if we go back, are they actually going to use Chase Brown over the course of the entire season?
Yeah, you're getting what you got. Okay,
getting what I got.
Yeah, you know what we say to our kids: you get what you get, and you don't throw a fit. I think that's what they got. You got that in 2023. That's your version.
I'm going to run with 2024 because what I did see from Chase Brown, I loved. I will assume that role expands. They're not going to have a tight end as their third down back. Zach Moss is probably not going to wow us, but let's be honest. If the Bengals as currently constructed remain as currently constructed over the course of the season, and they do the things they want to do offensively, no running back is going to put up insane numbers. They're never going to lead the league in rushing. If that happens, something has probably really gone wrong. But can he provide a dimension that Joe Mixon could not? I think the answer is yes. It still sort of remains to be seen if they've really filled that Samaje Perine role, but it just feels like there's a lot more upside. There's certainly more youth with Chase Brown. So I'm going to run with that group. I guess no pun intended. Mm-hmm. I'll boot last year because, they ran it back with Joe Mixon, and Joe was fine, but we had conversations about moving on from him during the 2022 season. They never filled the Perine role. They didn't use Brown to the extent that we would have liked. And they became easier to defend once Joe got hurt, and that was a big chunk of the season. But I'm gonna boot that group. And 2022, Samaje Perine was valuable. Joe Mixon wasn't explosive, but it's a running back combination that they took to the AFC Championship game, so I really can't have many issues with that. I'll sort of pass on that group. I'll run with the group they have coming up this year.
I would maybe, I just because we don't know quite what we're going to get in this year with Brown and Moss, I feel like it's going to be pretty good and more explosive. but I would probably run with 22 because you were getting a little bit different version of Joe Mix. I thought there was a little bit more juice to mix in 2022, and he was a really nice. And Pirine was such a nice combo with him.
Yeah.
Once they really got that centered in together, so I would probably take that 1-2 punch, knowing what it was, over maybe the floor of what 2024 should be. But I think the ceiling is high that it could very easily be much better. And certainly you like a lot of what you saw from Chase Brown
with
last
what
year,
the Bengals,
and even Zach Moss.
Yeah, with what the Bengals needed in 2022, that group was fine, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that group was, again, they made the AFC Championship game.
No question. That's
right.
Just it. And the part of the reason why I want to do this exercise is that if you can find enough ways that you're better than the 2022 team, and all that they brought to the table, you should feel great about where you're at, much less last year, a team that was built well. It just fell apart. All right. On that note, let's go down to wide receiver here.
This is hard. This is the tough one.
I think it is. You have a lot of similarities. The top two lines are the same, Chase, Higgins. And then, of course, in 22 and 23, you had Boyd. The fourth line, Irwin, for 22 and 23, and he's back in 24. But you add Yoshivas, Charlie Jones, Jermaine Burton, all in whatever roles they're going to be this year. They were in rookie, small, developing roles last year, but no Tyler Boyd. Where do you land on this?
So, again, I ask annoying questions with each one of these. Am I allowed to fold Mike Gesicki into the wide receiver group?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. As like a half slot. Sure.
2024. I'm running with that group. If I'm allowed to do that.
Yeah. I mean, we could combine tight ends and receivers into pass catchers.
Well, and you wrote about this in sort of the postmortem of the draft when you looked at the offensive side. What's interesting is now how they deploy the tight ends. So does, for instance, Eric All become the inline guy, and now Mike Gesicki is a chess piece? I think you and I have talked about this, and you've written about this, like almost positionless football. So it's hard for me to talk about wide receiver / pass catchers and not fold Gesicki into that mix. I'm sure we're going to do tight ends, but if I'm allowed to do that, it's 2024 because I get Chase Higgins, a proven chess piece, who in Miami at his best averaged 11.5 yards a reception, could do things that the other tight ends they've had haven't been able to do. And that includes some productive tight ends, minus our friend Irv Smith. And then I get the upside of Jermaine Burton, the reliability of Trent Irwin, hopefully some sort of progression from Andre Yoshivas, who showed flashes last year, and then Charlie Jones. I know I've talked to you about this and asked you, it just sort of feels like they're out on him, but that doesn't mean he's not going to make the team, and that doesn't mean he can't help. So I'm going to run with that 2024 bunch. And then I don't know. I like the bottom end of the 23 bunch a little bit more. Yoshivas and Charlie Jones as opposed to Trent Taylor and Mike Thomas. I will pass on 23. And it's remarkable to say this because of the big three wide receiver group that did help this team get to the AFC Championship game. I'm gonna boot Chase, Higgins, Boyd, Irwin, Taylor, Thomas.
Oh man, I don't know how I can do anything other than run with the 22.
I get it.
They were all younger.
I get it.
Chase, Higgins, Boyd. I mean, they were just. It was so good, so good. I have a hard time. You saw the drop off in Boyd last year. We had Higgins obviously didn't have a great year.
I was going to say, I want to flip flop because I just remembered Higgins, aside from making the remarkable play against the Vikings, had a forgettable 2000.
The first half in particular. I mean, the first half in particular of last season. So to me,
and when Chase got hurt in 22, I keep interrupting you at your podcast. I'm sorry. When Chase got hurt in 22, Higgins, if you correct me if I'm wrong, had 3 100-yard games.
Yeah.
So I'm going back. I'm running with this group. Passing 22, and I'm booting last year.
I think the depth has never been better. Mm-hmm. Like you said, when you roll in Gesicki and what they can do with the tight end group, and even all the tight ends. I mean, Tanner Hudson, they'll throw Tanner Hudson and Tanner McLaughlin in there, right? I mean, throw all of these strictly pass catching tight ends, which they hadn't really been employing previously.
Yeah.
And even Hayden Hurst had a little bit more of a does it all type than those guys do. Throwing them into the mix as part of this, they're so deep in what they could do. They can sustain so many injuries, and the upside is very high with the development of Yoshibach, whatever Burton can be. Irwin is still here as Mr. Stability. I think the depth to me sets 24 apart, but it's a hard time. I have a hard time, getting away from the 22 season. I think that they are built to, do more this year, and that is such a huge difference. All right, let's switch over to the defensive side of the ball here.
We're not going to do tight end, so I can't take.
Well, I'm just going to roll. We rolled those
Smith.
in. I mean, I can.
All right.
You want to take shots at tight ends in the past? You can.
Just make fun of Irv Smith, man. That's it. That's okay. That's fine. It's low hanging fruit. We won't do it.
You did it by just now. You always find a way, Mo, to sneak in the Irv Smith shot, and that's what I appreciate about you. You never miss. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball and talk about the defensive line. This is one of our, it's kind of been the same. Yeah. And now it looks different. You had Hubbard, Hendrickson have been the top two for the entirety of this span here. You had Osai, but now you've got Miles Murphy in that third edge role. DJ Reader and BJ Hill. Now Reader's gone. Zach Carter was DT3 basically, and now he's out of that rotation. And you've got Rankins, Hill, and Jenkins in that mix. What of these groups would you take?
Rankins, Hill, and Jenkins sounds like a law firm.
Yeah. Rankins and Jenkins feels like it's going to end up being a thing at some point.
That's going to be a thing. That's like a bad morning show. Yeah. That's going to happen. This is an interesting
rock block with Rankins and Jenkins.
Yeah. This is a tough exercise because of the 3 seasons Trey Hendrickson has played in Cincinnati. 22 was good, but it wasn't what 21 was, and it certainly wasn't what last year was. Yet last year's interior defensive line play left a lot to be desired. All right, I'm running with this year. I'm running with this year for a couple of different reasons. And this is hard to do because this year's group doesn't have DJ Reader. I'm going to assume I get a reasonable version of last year's Trey Hendrickson. It's hard to ask him to get 17 and a half sacks, but maybe his weird trade request thingy puts a chip on his shoulder that we see something close to what we saw last year. When you start doing like your camp preview, do you do like breakout player for 2024? Do you do that? Who's going to be the breakout guy?
I'd be happy to do it for you.
All right. Can I nominate Miles Murphy?
Yeah, I think he's the number one candidate.
Right. Like, so, again, as like the second half of the season unfolded and there was so much focus on not having Burrow and the Jake Browning ascension and everything happening on offense, amid what was not a very good defense, Miles Murphy showed some real flashes. So, first round pick, a guy they obviously really like. I'm sort of looking at 2022 and Joseph Osai. Can Miles Murphy be better than Joseph Osai from 2 years ago? Yeah. Can he be better than the Miles Murphy of last year? I think the answer is yes. It's hard. It's hard to feel great, I guess, about the inside when you don't have a DJ Reader, but I don't know, man. I'm as all in on Chris Jenkins as any human being alive, and maybe I shouldn't be. Maybe I'm buying into things that have nothing to do with football, but I'm going to go 24. I'll run with.
Yep.
I'll boot last year because they were so bad against the run. And then in the middle, I'll have the 22 group. But even the 22 group left a little bit to be desired in terms of pass rush, which is why they drafted Miles Murphy. But I'm bullish on this year's group. And, again, is it going to be an elite defensive line? No, but it feels like they have a little bit more depth, a few more options. And a lot of upside with Jenkins, a lot of upside with Murphy. Still a great player in Hendrickson. Hopefully a fully healthy Sam Hubbard, which the Bengals didn't get last year. I'm going to run with that group.
The question for me is when do we start to see the age? Does the age set in with this group this year, or is it next year?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because you got Hubbard, Hendrickson, Rankins, Hill, all entering that territory of people watching them wondering, are we going to see the fall off? Is this when it happens? And so do they get one? Do they get one or two even more prime years out of these guys, or do you see depreciation? Do you get 2023 Tyler Boyd where you start to see the end coming on some of these guys? And that's a question. I mean, Hubbard, how will he respond to this injury? Will it be something that kind of nags his career, defines his career? Is it going to be like an injury to AJ Green where he was never the same? I think Hubbard feels like he'll be able to come back and be himself again, but you never know with these things. And so I think there's questions about what we will see as age creeps into the conversation here. That said, Miles Murphy and Chris Jenkins have the ability to be absolute hammers at premium positions on rookie contracts for the next 3 years next to each other at least. And so it kind of offsets a little bit. That said, give me 22. They were so well-rounded. Reader was just absolute dominant. Awesome. DJ Reader. You were getting Hendrickson and Hubbard. And I mean, Osai was when he was in there was playing well. I thought that group was spectacular. So I would run with the 22 group with 24 just behind, because I have that question about the age creeping in as the unknown there. But I put them just next. But it's close.
And this year's group, I mean, they did use 2 day 2 picks on defensive tackles.
Correct.
So there's a little bit
come through and be part of it.
Sure. And I'm going to sort of count on like any age related regression by the other 2 edges being offset by Miles Murphy taking that big step forward and enabling them to maybe, rotate guys a little bit more, or, just get more out of a player like Trey or like Sam, who's got more tread on their tires because they're not going to be leaned on as much. But I mean, like with basically all of these position groups, like that 2022 team was great. I mean, legitimately great in many respects, better than the previous year. So with almost any of these groups, you could not go wrong defaulting to 2022. But I think the cool part of this exercise is even if you defer to 22, you could see the upside in what they have at so many of these spots in 2024. Is all of that upside going to be realized? Maybe not, but there's certainly a lot of it. I know what I'm doing here, though.
Defensive backs. What are you doing here? You know where you're saying you might know where the boot is here?
Well,
with defensive backs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm booting last year. I mean, how do you not, right?
How do you not? Yeah.
How do you not? 22. Remember, Cheeto only plays half the season, and then they never lost another game until the AFC Championship game. What a great group! Cam Taylor-Britt had a big pick in the playoff game against Buffalo that year. Eli Apple, of course, whenever he did get beat over the top, it becomes a meme, but he fine. And then that group of safeties was just
Bates
terrific. Bates and Bell. Yeah. Mike Hilton's a terrific slot corner. Like, I am running all day with that group. This year, I don't know. I mean, I love the Geno Stone signing. You and I have talked about that a lot. I love the fact that Von Bell is back, but there is no Cheeto anymore. The Dax Hill dynamic is one of the most fascinating of that'll play out between now and week 1. I think this group has the capability of being better, but man, no Cheeto, no Jesse Bates, a 2-year older Von Bell, a 2-year older Mike Hilton. I don't know how you do anything but just run with 2022.
Yeah. I think I'm with you. I mean, I think it was solid. They, with the way Cam Taylor-Britt came in when Awuzie went down, and there's just a lot of questions. I mean, there's been a lot of questions last year and this year. It's been turned over basically completely. Mike Hilton, the only consistent name up here, and Cam Taylor-Britt, I think, has a chance to be a legitimate one this year. I'm really curious what happens with DJ Turner. Maybe he won't even be the starter. Maybe Dax Hill is the starter there. Maybe Mike Hilton is getting older, but still played really well last year once everything kind of settled down a little bit more around him. Who knows what Geno Stone's going to be transferring over? Who knows what an older Von Bell and a younger Jordan Battle look like? Who's even starting? And if who knows, man? Like, it's such a defining question when we break down this group, and I do the same thing that you did, where I'm running with 22 and booting 23, and have a big question mark around 24. So, and the reason I wanted to do this exercise is, one, to look at how good you should feel about the 24 team.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Mo, you mentioned it. The 22 team was maybe the best run in Bengals history.
Could be.
That 10-game winning streak was almost unparalleled, and you picked only one of the position groups from there.
Yeah.
And you have most of them for 24, and maybe that's the hope of the beginning of a season.
Right.
But I mean, that's saying something if you feel that way today. But the question mark again is, what happens in this defensive backfield? Have they really fixed it? Or will that be something where, in the same way it played a major role in derailing 2023, it could play a major role in derailing an otherwise great roster that you like in 2024?
The thing is, like, the bar is not that high to clear. They just finished middle of the pack in explosive plays allowed, right?
Yep.
Last year, they led the planet in explosive plays given up. I think the beauty of this defense is it doesn't have to be elite. We'd like for it to be, but it doesn't have to be elite. It can't be the disaster that we saw last year. And if let's say it's league average across the board, stopping the run, getting after the quarterback, explosive plays, getting off the field on third down, getting off the field on fourth down, turnovers forced. If it's league average across the board, is this team going to make the playoffs?
No question.
Okay. So, like, it is the main question I have, and it extends to the entire defense, but there's really a magnifying glass on the secondary. How much better are they legitimately going to be? But we're simply hoping for good, okay, league average. We're not asking for, it would be great if Cam Taylor-Britt were a shutdown corner. Well, but he just has to be good. And that you can extend that to so many different places. And if that happens, this team really does have a chance to be really, really good. And so, but I think it's a fun exercise, because I do think, again, you could in so many cases default to 22 because that team was so good. But I do think you can make the case for the upside. Just looking at the entire roster. But yeah, man, I question how good that secondary might be. Can we also say this year's quarterback room is better?
Yes, I was gonna go into the quarterback discussion, but I figured, well, you know what though, there's more question. There's more questions around Joe Burrow this year coming off this injury, I guess.
Sure.
Than there were. So you're probably taking somebody that although there's been coming off injury or something every year. But I guess if you're throwing it, certainly with Jake Browning though, you feel better about the backup situation than you have,
how come we didn't do run, pass, or punt with the punting situation?
You can punt them all probably at this point. I think still searching. Yeah, I think that's what it is. Mo, I appreciate you going in here and your feelings are known about the 23 team, it appears. And maybe that's just bad taste in the mouth still. But really, you have the offensive line and nothing else. And think about how we talked about that roster last year at this time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's saying something if you feel like the roster is better today than it was last year in almost every single aspect. To me, that's a sign of probably a successful offseason. I
think they have had a good offseason. It's been dominated by a lot of noise with Hendrickson and T. Higgins, but I think just transactionally speaking, it's been a good offseason. I really like the upside of the draft. I like the fact you and I talked about this again. I like the fact that they swung for the fences here, which is not something they typically do. I don't want that to be the strategy maybe every year, but I think here, it makes sense. And if the upside of some of those guys is realized in the short term, look out, man.
Yeah.
But
I mean, typically, even with some of your riskier picks, you usually get 1 or 2 years where they're in here trying to prove a point and make an impact, and you get the best of those types of players. Rookie's always trying to make a good impression. So that's certainly part of the equation.
And I also sort of like, you talk about like last year's team and kind of dumping all over it. Nothing went right. They went 9-8.
Yeah.
Like if that's as bad in this little era, if that's as bad as it gets, boy, that's okay. And I think that speaks to depth and the way they built last year's team, the quality of the coaching staff, which obviously there's been some turnover, and the quality of the organization. It wasn't a great year by any stretch, but they didn't bottom out at like 5-12. Yeah. And for all that went wrong, they didn't get eliminated till week 17. I don't know, man. I walked away from last year just kind of shrugging my shoulders going, all right, like those things happen. Burrow just wasn't healthy. It just never really got going. No need to really go back to the drawing board and just blow everything up, make some changes, make some upgrades, and do some things to improve the areas where that team was deficient. And I feel like for the most part, that's happened.
Yeah. And you could probably add in here schedule, and you'd be running with the 2024 schedule every single time, which we will talk about next week.
Oh, are you working on the mock schedule?
Mock schedule is in the works. That's right. A lot of excitement. Mock schedule. We can talk about our favorite potential trips and things that we'll be looking for next week when we catch up with you. Mo, appreciate it as always. And we'll talk to you next week.
Looking forward to it, man. Thank you.